Good morning, everyone. We are going to open this up, and we'll still have a few more minutes to go before we'll get started, but just want to make sure that audio is working and that everyone is able to see our screen. So if there are any issues with that, please let us know, and we will make that correction before we get started today. But we've got about 2 or 3 more minutes. We'll wait for some more to come in. So if you're waiting for us, go ahead and grab that extra cup of coffee, and we'll be starting up in just a minute or so. Hello, everyone. We are going to get started now with our webinar for the day. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to be talking today about helping a volunteer treasurer get started with Church360 Ledger. My name is Ken Olemeyer, so I thank you for being here. I'm one of the senior marketing managers here at Concordia Publishing House. I've got my contact information there if you'd like to ask any questions later, or if there's anything we can do to help you on this. Leading our webinar today, I'm very excited about this, is my good friend, Peter Frank. Peter has had many years working with this software, knows the ins and outs of Ledger. So if there are questions that you have as we go through this webinar, please feel free to add them or ask us, and we can help answer those for you. Peter's contact information is there as well. Got a few housekeeping rules as we get started in today's webinar. First thing, we've got about 15 minutes for the presentation today. And with that, we're going to take about 10 minutes or so for questions. If you've got questions, you can ask them at any time. There's a chat feature here on the webinar, so if you type something in, we'll be able to address those at the end of the webinar. So if you think of something as you're watching the webinar today, go ahead and type that in. We'll get that taken care of. One of the other housekeeping rules is that the recording will be shared. So if you're not watching this live, we thank you for taking the time to watch it a little bit later, or if there's something you want to catch after this, watch the videotape again and it'll all be here for you. Who is Concordia Technology Solution? Well, we are the church administration division of Concordia Publishing House, and we've been developing software for churches since 1984. So during that time, we've seen a lot of change with software, and we've also got some experience in doing this. So we've been able to work with you, our customers, in trying to develop this software and continually trying to improve this software. And I think we've got something really great to show you today, so we're excited about that. What we're going to be talking about is Church360 Ledger. And Church360 Ledger is part of a bigger suite, the Church360 Suite of products. So we've got Ledger, which is our financial side. Then we also have Church360 Members, which is our contact management software. And that's where you really get to develop the relationship with your members and such. And you get to know them through that software. But there's also Church360 Unite, which is our web development software, so our website software. And all three of these software programs talk together. So it's very convenient that you can be helping yourself with information from all of them. And it's just a convenient package to use to really get to know your members and get to know your finances. So as I said, Ledger is our financial software package, and it's very intuitive. You'll see that as Peter walks through this for you. It's very secure. There's a lot that you can do with this software, and you can be secure in the fact that it's not going to be anything that people are going to be able to get into or anything like that. You have control of it. And it's very focused. It helps you stay focused on the gifts that are given to a church through donations, and then the outlays that you have just to help keep that church running. Few assumptions we're going to make today as we get together first on this webinar. First, we're assuming that you're not an accountant. I go around and I talk with a lot of pastors. I know a lot of second career pastors. I can't think of too many that I've heard that are second career accountant pastors, but perhaps you are. But we're going to assume that you're not, so we're going to keep this at a very high level. We're also going to assume that you're new to Church360 Ledger, and that's where this webinar will help kind of explain things for you and show you some of the different features. And this really isn't an assumption. This is a fact. We know you're extremely busy. So we're going to keep this tight. We're going to do a high overview on things. If you have more questions, if you have more needs, you're always welcome to get a hold of us. So we know you're busy. So that's why we really do appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to watch this webinar and help learn a few things new about Church360 Ledger. One of the first things I want to do is put a couple poll questions on here and have you tell us a little bit about yourself. So let me get that. And we'll just start with this one. I'm going to launch it. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your role within your congregation? And I'm going to see if that's up there. If you can just go ahead and click on that quickly, that'll help give us some ideas as we tailor some of this for you. So just click through there and let us know what role you have. All right, we're collecting the responses. It actually looks like we're about half and half today with some ordained pastors and with a few financial managers. So that's great. That's very helpful. So I'm going to close that one. And then let's start another poll and just see, are you currently using Church360 Ledger in your church? We'll take a minute here to do that. Okay, it looks as if most of the people with us today are not using Church360 Ledger. So we really do appreciate you coming in and learning a little bit more about it. So that helps us kind of know the overview that we can do this for you. So here's the outline of the presentation we're going to give today and the demonstration. We're going to talk about the goals of Church360 Ledger. Why should you even be looking at this type of software and how can it help you? We're going to take a tour of the software. Peter's going to give that to you, show you some of the power of this software and how intuitive it is in many ways. And then we'll take some questions and answers. As I said, if you have any questions, there's a chat feature here on our webinar software. Go ahead and type that in. Or if you think of something later, if you're watching this later, send us an email and let us know. So what are some of the goals of Church360 Ledger? Well, church finances are often managed by volunteers. Let's face it, we all are busy doing different roles, and if we can find a volunteer or two that can help us out with our finances, that really does help. And for some of you who are financial people on this webinar, maybe you're a volunteer in this position. So thank you for taking the time to volunteer as well. And truly, most volunteers may not be full-time accountants, or they may not be accountants, that have practiced recently. So this software is able to help them out. And this demonstration today will show you ways that you can help those volunteers out. Since we're getting gifts and donations from people, accountability is extremely important in the church. And one of the things that this software allows us to do is prevent the ill-intentioned from doing wrong. but then also preventing the well-intentioned from just making mistakes. That sometimes happens. So we want to make sure that we're making a software product that really does help prevent those type of things. This software, Church360 Ledger, was actually designed to increase accountability. And you'll see that as we show different ways to keep tracking of information. And it's also designed to prevent mistakes. There are certain things that you just can't do in the software if it's a mistake. And Peter will show some of those type of things, or it will give you a red flag that you need to correct this. So in today's webinar, we're going to just basic introduction. We're going to look at the chart of accounts that you can keep with Church360 Ledger. We're going to look at some budgeting features that you will have on Church360 Ledger. We'll also take a look at transactions, credits and debits, and then look at reconciliation so that at the end your reporting is all correct, and your reports so that you can then share them with your church council, maybe with your church body as a whole. Just different ways to slice and dice and report on different things, different aspects of the finances of your church. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to switch this over to Peter now and let him get going on this. So I'm going to hit a couple buttons here. Peter, I'm going to switch this to you and change presenters. Thank you very much. As I said, if you have questions, go into the chat feature. We'll be back at the end. I'll be back at the end with Peter, and we'll help answer any of those questions. So, Peter, I am changing presenter to you.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Ken. Thanks for that fantastic introduction. Getting our cameras and everything set up, get my screen showing. Hang on 1 second. I think we're just about there. Good. All right. So you all should be able to see my screen now. And like Ken said, I've got a lot of experience with this from my role here at CPH, but also my role in church. So we introduced Church360 Ledger several years back, and that was one of the first projects I got to see here at Concordia Technology Solutions from the beginning to the release and to where we are today. And one of the first things we did when I joined the CTS team is they showed me some of the checks and balances they were working on as they created Church360 Ledger and the automated systems to make sure that everything equals across the entire account. The credits and debits always match, and it's been pretty exciting to see where we're at today and how it's being used in churches to help them manage their finances is just so wonderful and gratifying to see that the work that we're doing is supporting the church. And that's really what I want to talk about today. We have recently introduced Church360 Ledger at my congregation because of some of these challenges that we face. We struggle to find volunteers for the treasurer position. We're not a large church. We don't have a full-time person who is an accountant on staff, and I'm sure many of you are the same way. And so that's why as you look to having volunteers join your church as a treasurer, giving them the right tools to get started and the right training to use those tools is critical. So what you see here is a kind of an empty shell. We're using our fictional church, St. John's Church and School, as our example today. And then I'll give you another example that has data filled in. But I want to start off with a blank slate to show you how easy it is to get up and running. So you'll see here at the top, we've got our navigation. This is what we call our books, where you can select that. We'll talk about that in just a moment. You've got your different icons over here on the right, your check queue, your upcoming transactions, your reports, your settings, and your user information. Then here you have what we call our chart of accounts bar. So when you type in there, you can actually see all of the different accounts and quickly navigate between them. Now, right now we don't have anything, so we're going to add those in just a few moments. Then you'll have your transactions, and we know that everything is really just a journal entry. If you're an accountant, you know that everything is just a journal entry. But if you're a volunteer, if you're not an accountant, that's kind of scary to have a journal entry with credits and debits and figure out what should go where. We've created these nice transaction paths that do some of that work for you to say, okay, well, if it's going to be a transfer, then it needs to be the same kind of account. And I'll show you all of that in a little while, but I wanted to point out that this is available, this top section here is available no matter where you are in the software for easy entry. So we'll look at those things in just a few moments. And then finally, we have our account view here. And the account view has the navigation between the accounts, the running balance, which right now is 0 because we haven't started anything, and then your actual ledger, all of those individual transactions for that account. So what we're going to do is start at the very beginning, your chart of accounts. So we're going to go up here under settings and go to chart of accounts. So the chart of accounts is what makes what we call a book. A book is a set of chart of accounts as well as all the transactions that go with it. And in this case, we've got St. John Church and School. Now, some churches who have schools will have separate books, and you might have a separate book for your altar guild or your men's club. You can do all of that for one account, for one church, and still have those books separately. And this chart of accounts is what makes it unique. Now, there's 4 types of accounts here. We go based on fund accounting and specifically cash accounting with that. So these are not equity accounts. You're not going to put in the value of your property here. These are strictly cash accounts where you have cash placed or where you are owed cash from a different account, or where you owe it. So the first one is assets. Now, assets is pretty straightforward. These are bank accounts. This is where you have your money placed. The only time that it won't be a bank account would be if it's like petty cash, where you'll have something sitting over there in a box by the secretary or the office administrator, and you might have $75 or something that you can do those little small petty cash transactions. Liabilities are where you owe money. So for example, if you took out a loan for your building project, you would have a building loan. If you have a credit card that you use for different transactions, that would be a liability. So you'd add transactions to it, and then you'd pay it off. So we'll look at that example in a little bit. Those are your actual cash. Then on the other side of things is your income and expense accounts. Income is money that is coming in through offerings or other ways of earning revenue. Expense is money going out. Unfortunately, this is usually where a lot of the transactions happen because there's always money going out, but it's all to serve the purposes of ministry. So those are your 4 different types of accounts, and there's this nice balance between them of money you have, money you owe, money coming in, money going out. And that's really where those credits and debits align and match up. So let's start by adding in a few asset accounts. Over here on the right, you'll see there's 2 different options. There's accounts and categories. Now, accounts are exactly what you expect that to be. Those are the bank accounts. So let's just call this First Bank and Trust. Now, you can allow different account numbers to be in there, but you don't have to. So if you have a way that you do account numbers right now, you can bring those in. Or if that just confuses things, you can leave it empty. Now, in some cases, you can write checks from this. So let's go ahead and say this one is the savings account. I'll type in savings correctly. And you can't write checks from that account. Now, you can enter in the initial balance. I'm going to do a nice round number of $250,000. I'm sure a lot of churches would really like to have that much in their savings account. But I'm going to do that for some different examples today. So we'll go ahead and create that. Let's now create our checking account. So we'll do a First Bank and Trust checking. And again, we're going to ignore the account number because we don't have to have that. And I'm going to put this as $50,000. All right. Now you'll see here, well, these are kind of similar. These are all in First Bank and Trust. What if we just grouped them together and saw exactly what we have at First Bank and Trust? They're 2 separate accounts, but we want to see them summarized. So that's where categories come in. So you could create a new category called First Bank and Trust. Save that. We'll bring that up to the top. There's a nice drag and drop functionality. And then we're just, okay, well, this will be the savings. We know it's at First Bank and Trust because we're going to put it underneath that category. So we'll just drop it in underneath. And the same with the checking. We can remove that because that's part of the category. So now you can see that under First Bank and Trust, we have $300,000. 250,000 of that is within savings and 50,000 is within checking. Let's go ahead and save those changes. You'll see here that it's telling you exactly what you're saving. You've rearranged accounts or categories. You've created 1 new category and 2 new accounts. We'll go ahead and confirm that. All right, so now we have that. We'll talk about restricted funds in just a few minutes. I'll give you an example of how we'll use those. Let's go to liabilities. This is one that I think is a very practical example. the church credit card. It's safer to have a credit card than a debit card in case it gets stolen, because it's not taking money directly out of the bank account. But I know some churches struggle with the idea of having a credit card because of racking up debt. So we're just going to use this example of the safe factor of having a credit card. Not that we want to put transactions and have a debt and income or interest being accumulated. This is just for transaction purposes. So we're going to go ahead and create a new account, and we're going to call this the church credit card. And we don't need an account number, and we're going to start with a zero balance. We don't need to say that we owe anything right now. All right, we can also create one for that building loan that we were talking about. Building loan. And let's say that we are almost done paying that off. It's going to be $25,000 that we owe left. It's really close to being done. It's a great feeling to have. All right, we'll go ahead and save that. So those are a couple examples of liabilities. Let's get into income next. Now, there's usually two types of income that you have. You have the charitable gifts, the offerings that are given, and then you might have some other income that comes into the church. Since it's a church and school, you probably have tuition coming in that is not meant to be a charitable gift because it's being exchanged for that service. So let's create a couple categories. First off, we're going to say this one is offerings. And then we're going to create another one that we call school, well, we'll just call it tuition. There we go. And then we'll have another one that we call other income. There we go. Now let's create a couple of accounts. So the first one would be the general fund. That is the money that is coming in from just the general operating expenses. So that means that it has not been given for a specific church or a specific reason to the church. It's just for how the church can best use it. Let's create another one. Okay, we're going to call this the building fund. These are funds dedicated specifically to paying off that building loan. We're going to start this at 0. All right, let's create one more account that we're going to call the Youth Ministry Fund. And we're going to start that off at 0 as well. Now, this is just a very simple setup. And certainly, you'll have many different funds. Even the smallest of congregations have a variety of different needs that people contribute to in very specific ways. And the nice thing about Church360 Ledger is, as you can see, that's all it takes to create a new fund. So, or a new account, a new fund on your chart of accounts. As you get gifts for specific reasons, maybe it's a reason that never came up before. We're about to have our bells repaired because they have been around for 100 years and they have some repairs that are needed. Well, that's not something that we had a few years ago, but we have that need now. And so as people contribute to that bell repair fund, we create a new bell or a new account for that. Tuition, let's go here and then we'll create a couple different ones. One would be for maybe preschool tuition. And whoops, initial balance of 0 right now. And then one would be, let's call it elementary school tuition. And we'll also do 0. So that's just a very straightforward way of breaking up the tuition income. And then other income, when you think about where other income might come in, one common one is facility rentals. We'll do that as 0. So if somebody rents out the fellowship hall for $50 for the afternoon, that's where that income would come in. So as you're first setting this up and as you're helping your volunteer treasurer get going, you want to create kind of an audit of these things. You probably already have a chart of accounts set up somewhere, but with a new treasurer and a new financial system, it's really good to just review everything and say, what makes the most sense? What is necessary right now that may not have been necessary in the past? And what can we get rid of from the past history that says we don't do that anymore? This is a good way to kind of go through it. All right, we'll go ahead and save that. Now, in that same way that you do that for income, you also want to look at expenses. And there's going to be a lot of parallels to this. So, for example, your category might be church expenses. And we probably don't even need to put expenses on there because it's all under expenses. Next one might be school expenses. Under church, you might have a different category that is, let's say, payroll. And we can actually stack categories together. So you might have 2 under here for, oh, actually, you might even say payroll is different and church and school are under that. So you can set it up in any different way that you want. We're just going to go ahead and for the example today, put payroll under there. And then for a new account, we might say we have our called staff. And then maybe our contract staff. That's another way of doing it. This is where you might have a lot of flexibility, and well, where you have a lot of flexibility in how you track it, and where you'll have to look at what's best for your congregation. So pastor might fall under called staff, whereas the office assistant might be under a contract staff, or maybe non-called staff. You might also have ministry expenses. All of this is part of the ministry, but very maybe specific ministry expenses. So we're going to put that at the same level as payroll, but then you would have something like the youth ministry. And we put that on there. You might have vacation Bible school. So we'll drop those under ministry expenses. Oops. Oh, you know what? I put ministry expenses as an account. I meant to put that as a category. We'll just do that. And that's the fun part about setting up your chart of accounts, is that there's always this give and take of, you know, if we're starting this from scratch, maybe we could do it this way and moving things around. That's why we made that drag and drop. All right, we're wrapping up here because I just looked at the time. I can spend all day on chart of accounts. Let's make this last one textbooks for the school. And we'll put that account underneath school. Very basic chart of accounts. But I wanted to show this example where you can have multiple tiers, and you can keep going to whatever is practical, and have category under category under category, and then finally your accounts. All right, let's save this, confirm. It's by no means complete, but it's got a lot of great examples of the different types of accounts you would have. Now, I want to come back to this restricted fund. So we talked about before the youth fund or the building fund. Typically, as funds come into an account, as offerings are given, they're split up by those different purposes, but they're usually deposited in the same bank account. So often those general operating expenses will be deposited under checking, but you want to have a place for those specific gifts that are restricted, and that's where a restricted fund comes in. So we'll go to new restricted fund, and we'll call this the building fund. And you'll notice the first time I create it, then also I have a new account created called unrestricted checking. And it starts off with that balance. There's 0 under building fund and there's 50 under unrestricted checking. And if I add another restricted fund like the youth ministry, put that there, that just creates another restricted fund. It doesn't give me another unrestricted. It'd be great if we could just continually add to our unrestricted, but that's not practical. All right, so we'll go ahead and save that. We'll confirm. All right, so there's our chart of accounts. One of the next things you do after you set up your chart of accounts is typically put in the budget for the year. Now, we don't budget our cash assets, and we don't budget our cash liabilities, but we do budget income and expense. We say, what do we expect to get in, and what do we expect to go out? So underneath the settings, you go into budgets, right underneath the chart of accounts. And you'll see here that we've got this income and expense and all of the subcategories underneath it and all of the actual accounts. And the things that are actual accounts that require a budget are all white and are very visible there, whereas everything else is kind of grayed out because that'll automatically calculate. So we've got this set up to be a non-calendar fiscal year, July through June, which is often how churches with schools do it. Now we've got here, let's start off with general fund. You might want to go through and say, all right, July is typically a slow month because of summer vacations and everything. August starts to pick up again. September, we're in full swing. Everybody's back in giving. And so October is good, November is good. And then comes December with Christmas, and our offering really ranks up there. And you start going through and typing in each one. Now that's one way to do that, and certainly not a bad way. It can be a little bit more time consuming and require a little bit more thought, but thought during the budgeting process is not a bad thing. All right, let's go ahead and wrap that up. So you can see all of this kind of totals underneath it. And then on the far left-hand side, you can get that total for the year, $159,000. Just throwing numbers out here. Now the building fund, you might say, well, we've got 2 people and each of them give $500 every month, no matter what. And so you can say, well, I know we're going to get $12,000, and you just type in that total and it splits it up by 12. There's the $1,000 every month. That's another way of doing it. You may say, well, I know I've got regular gifts of $500 for youth ministry every month. Actually, that means that's $6,000. But every year at Christmas time, we get an extra $1,000 gift. So you can go and start with one approach of splitting it out and then go and change them manually. Now, once you've been doing this for a few years, you also have the added benefit of having previous year budget or previous year actual. And those buttons will just fill in those details right with the click of a button. You can also do that for all of them with last year's budget or last year's actuals. So you go through your chart of accounts and you do this, and that can be a time-consuming process. If you're like my church, we've been doing this the same way for years in Microsoft Excel. And I personally love Excel. I find it very easy to use. We modeled a lot of the functionality off of Excel. But Excel is still kind of top-notch when it comes to doing budgets, in my opinion. And so we've made it really easy. We'll go ahead and save these changes first, so it kind of locks it in. You can actually export this budget structure to Excel. So, and it probably will pop up on a different screen here. I've got 3 screens in front of me. We'll see which screen it ended up on. It usually comes over by, let's see, here we go. All right, let me drag this in. And we'll open that up for you. See, yeah, you should be able to see it. So this has a very similar structure. Everything is indented appropriately. There's your different accounts. It doesn't give, oh, actually, when I do enable editing, it should give you those subtotals in place. Yep, there we go. What you can actually do is you might say, well, all right, here's the preschool tuition. I don't get that fun thing of where I can get the totals and everything by typing here because it's just one formula. But if you wanted to, you can fill all of this in an Excel, copy whatever cells you want. So we'll copy those 3 there starting July under preschool tuition. We'll go back into Ledger. There's July under preschool tuition. Paste it in there and you'll see it fills it in. And you can do that anywhere on the screen. So at my church, I just took what our volunteer had for the budget. He had it in Excel. I took it. I made sure the structure was the same. I went and copy pasted it all into Ledger and it was there. It's a really easy process. All right. That's, I don't know how many different ways I showed you how to enter budgeting in there, but that's one of the strengths of Ledger that we've focused on is the ease of budget entry because it's such a time-consuming process in and of itself. We don't want the entry to be time-consuming. All right, let's keep moving on. So we've entered in our chart of accounts, so we've entered in our budget. Now I'll start doing transactions. Now there's a lot of other little things up here under settings that we could talk about, but transactions is such a key part of it. That's what we're going to get into. So let me click this Ledger button up in the top left, our logo there in the orange. That'll always take you to the home screen. So you'll see here, there's our 4 types of accounts: assets, liabilities, income, and expenses. If we click on assets, you can see there's our first bank and trust category. And when you click on that, you can see savings and checking. And when you click on checking, then you can see the unrestricted and the building fund and the youth ministry, just like we set it up. And up here in this chart of accounts bar, we'll clear this out. You can see everything in that exact order as well. So a couple different ways to navigate to it. But regardless of where you're at, you can always click this new transaction. Now there's 5 types of transaction paths, as we call it. They all generate journal entries. So we'll start a journal entry and just show you what this looks like. You'll see there's a memo and a date. There's a payee, which is optional depending on your type of transaction. You might want to assign it to a payee. So if you're writing a check to somebody and you want to assign it to Ameren Electric, you could put that in there. And then you just have your T chart. your accounts with your debits and credits. This is T-chart accounting that probably causes those volunteer treasurers to get a headache thinking about all these things. I have always struggled with whether I'm doing credits or debits depending on the account. I've got a little thing up on my bulletin board there. I can't show it right now, but it's got that listing of if it's an account, an asset account, and you want to increase it, you do this, decrease it, you do that. We don't have to worry about all of that unless we're doing a journal entry. So all you'd have to do is say, go to your unrestricted and put in your $50 here, and then go into your building fund and put your $50 there. That's fine for a treasurer who is an accountant, but for a treasurer who's not an accountant, that's where these transaction paths come in. So if I click up here under journal entry and I go to transfer, my screen is going to change, and we designed this all to look kind of like a checkbook. Not exactly the same information, but at least it gives you that feel of making a transaction with your personal checking account. It makes it just comfortable. So here we go. Here's the initial thing. We're going to move unrestricted funds to buildings. Let's see, there we go. And we do have a character limit on there, but that's fine. So we're going to say start off under the checking. There's our unrestricted checking, and we're going to move $5,000 to our building fund, which is part of the checking. So that is how it works so quickly. You can see here that this is one asset, this is another asset. It's a transfer, so they're the same type of accounts. And you'll see I'm crediting the one account and debiting the other. I already got it wrong in the journal entry, which is why I'm glad to have these transaction paths. We're saying we're taking this account, this amount, and moving it over here. So when I click save, then my numbers start to get updated. Now I forgot one thing before. You'll see here I have my date set to 2016. That was a mistake. I should have checked that at the account. It actually lets you select your date in a number of different ways. This is the fiscal year. This is it broken down in quarters. This is it broken down in months, and then custom date ranges. I should have noticed that before when I didn't have balances showing. But you'll see now I've got my unrestricted checking with 45,000 and my building fund with 5,000. Down below here, I have my initial journal entry from the date that I set as the first date of transactions. Initial balance of 50,000. And then both of these sides of the transaction show up because I'm at that top level. If I drill down under unrestricted, it would only show the things that affected unrestricted. And if I drill back all the way to assets, you can see two initial balances, the savings and the checking, and then that transaction that I just made. So everything is being tracked and shown here. Let's do a few more transactions. Let's do a deposit. This is a common weekly occurrence. We're going to say that this is weekly offerings, and we'll put it back to Monday. Monday is a common day to do those. All right, we don't need to pay because we're not paying money out. We're going to say, all right, we received this and we're going to deposit it into the checking account. And let's say that it was, I don't know, $3,000. The income, those are those accounts where money is coming in. We've got our general fund, we've got our building fund, we've got our youth ministry fund. And so maybe 2,500 of that was for the general fund, and we had 250 for the building and 250 for youth ministry. Now this all balances out. We could say we're going to put this all under unrestricted checking and then do a transfer from unrestricted into these specific restricted funds. You can do that, or you can just go in here and say there's a building fund and there's the youth ministry fund, and I'm going to put 2,500 here and 250 there and 250 there. Now, one thing I want to show you, if you look at this, I typed in 25. I'm showing this blank amount here for 225. This number here is the number needed to make this a balanced transaction, to have your credits and debits match. And it's going to do that no matter what. So if you're over here and you haven't finished typing in yet, it'll show that. So if you only know bits and pieces of the information, it starts to do the math for you, which is very helpful. So there is our nice balanced transaction of income accounts for the right purposes, going into the asset for, again, the right purposes. And we can go ahead and save that. And now that's been entered in. All right, let's do another transaction. We'll go and do a payment. So we talked about Ameren Electric before. We didn't create an expense account for that. We really should have. That would have been a great example. That's okay. Let's say we're going to put this on the church credit card. And so we'll say electric bill. And this is to Ameren Electric. And it's going to be $50. And actually, let's go ahead and just create that account, just for example's sake. Chart of accounts, expenses, church expenses, new account, electricity, 0 starting balance. We'll put that under ministry expenses, save changes. There we go. That's how easy it is to add a new account. Now we'll go back just from the screen. We'll go back here to payments and say, all right, we're going to go back to the church credit card, and this is going to go on the electric expenses and electric bill and Ameren Electric. And we're going to say that this is, let's say it's $100. That's probably low for a church electric bill in the middle of the summer, but let's go with it. So now we've got this electric bill, and we're going to credit the church credit card by $100 and debit the expense account by $100. It's a nice balanced transaction. So we can go ahead and save that. And now that transaction has happened. Now let's go back and see where that's at. We're going to go back to here, go to expenses, go to church, go to ministry, go to electricity, and there it is. We've gone down the line, and each way, actually, if you were looking, it's always there because we're going down that chart of accounts. Now, if I forgot, and maybe it said something like 105, and I messed up, and I was like, oh, I meant to update that. I can go in here, see that transaction, and say, actually, that was 105. Let's change that. I made a mistake. We'll correct it and hit save. Now that has been updated, and all of the experienced accountants that are watching should say, no, 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 that's not what you're supposed to do. You need to create a journal entry to track that. Otherwise, people can just change transactions at will and hide any of their, any of the ill-intended acts, those embezzling acts of changing the accounts. Well, this is where, going back to what Ken talked about before, we do things to both help you if you make a mistake, but also prevent those who are doing wrong. All in one fell swoop here. We have had this mistake and the potential for embezzling cash, and we've taken care of that by actually creating a journal entry on the back end for what we just did. You'll see here that 105 has this little arrow that when you extend it, it says edited on 8/22/19. And so that $5 change is actually a different journal entry. And if you go up into our reports and you go to event log, you can see here under event log that I created a new transaction, a revision of this transaction. This new transaction is actually that $5 change. And so it actually took place as a journal entry. It's just linked to the original one. And so no one can ever go in and change a transaction without it being tracked. But at the same time, anybody who's made a mistake can go in and fix it just to what it's supposed to be. And so you've got those two sides of the coin there that says we've helped the person who made the mistake, but we've also created an audit trail to show exactly what was changed so that nobody can ever go in and hide something. Now, another way that you might be able to do this is if you just changed the beginning balance. If you were trying to hide things, you could go in here and say, well, let's just go and change that beginning balance by $5. No one will ever know the difference. Well, that's not good accounting either. Now, that should show up once you've got your reconciliation. And that's what we've tied those two things together. Right now, I could go into my chart of accounts and change that beginning balance. But the very first time I reconcile my account to that beginning balance, to those transactions, it will stop allowing you to change the opening balance, that beginning balance there. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to go back here to the home. We'll go to assets. We'll go to First Bank and Trust. We'll go to our checking account. And now that we're in an actual account, we still have some subcategories of unrestricted ability fund and all that, but this is what the bank sees as one account. I get this green reconcile button. And when I click on this, your whole screen changes. When this was created, we joked it was the Hulk mode because everything's green. We thought about putting a little purple stripe down at the bottom. We didn't do that. That would have been too silly. But we now have this different mode of saying we're going to reconcile transactions. And so we'll start off here and say, what is our beginning balance? Oops. And this is where you'll take that bank statement and say our beginning balance was this, our ending balance was $53,000. We've got $3,000 in transactions that we need to account for. Actually, in this case, our really beginning balance was 0 because we have that initial balance there. So I put in my starting balance, I put in my ending balance. It says there's $53,000 that we have to account for. And so as I start to click these transactions off, as I'm reviewing my bank account, then my off buy gets here to 0. And if, for example, I have a transaction on here that is not shown on my bank statement, maybe it just hasn't happened yet. And I can say, okay, well, I'm going to reconcile these that are on my bank statement, but this one's going to be next month. Or if you have something on your bank statement that's not on here, you know that you need to go and enter that transaction. And so this reconciliation is a very good process to get into. If you're not doing it at the church, that's a problem. That means that you're not tracking everything. And it's really easy to lose sight of transactions that occur, even just by mistake. But if you're doing this on a monthly basis, you're checking all this out, you're clicking, when you get this to be a balance right there, that off buy, you just click save. And now all of those transactions are confirmed as being reconciled. And you can see here that the lock comes into play. At that point, I can't go in here and modify anything because we've already said that it's correct. So again, that's preventing things from happening, because even though we create a journal entry for it, if you go and you change something from 3 months ago, it's easy to miss. And so if you're doing that due diligence of reconciling on a monthly basis, every time you get that bank statement, you won't have those issues of potentially hiding things. And like I said before, as soon as you do this for the first time, you can no longer go into your chart of accounts and change that beginning balance. All right, so there's some of that security stuff. Let's talk about a few other things. You know, we mentioned before those nice transaction paths. One of them that I didn't show you is the check path. This check path should look very familiar to anybody who writes a check. If you wanted to do your Ameren electric bill and you say, okay, we're going to put this on the credit card, $100, there's the electric expense, $100. All of that is the same thing. Now, you'll see here that it gives you some little notices to say, well, there's no funds available on that. Well, we're doing it to a liability. There's not funds to pay for it. If this is a, let's go and say we did this right out of the unrestricted checking, then it would be okay. That little flag there disappears because we got more than enough in checking. But you'll see it's the same kind of transaction as a payment, but you can see what that check is. Say electric bill. Go. And now that's under the memo. If we go and save that, it'll tell me something different. It'll say the transaction has been entered, but now it's been added to your print queue. Now our print queue is up here in the top left, the leftmost icon in the top right. When I click on that, there is my electric bill ready to be printed. And if I go and select it and click print, it's going to give me this print preview. So you can print all of your checks right from Ledger. Now it's a proprietary format. We work with a company called Forms Plus out of Georgia. They're excellent to work with. They have the highest of security checks and reasonable prices. We've had hundreds of churches using them over the years. So that's something to look at, but I want to let you know that's available. That's that different type of transaction. The other thing that you can do, let's go back here, go back to this check right there. You'll know that you've got an electric bill coming out every month or every quarter or however your billing is set up. And you might want to be reminded of that says, okay, this is coming up. Or you might want to just save those details so that you're not re-entering it every time. Well, that's where this reoccurring transaction comes in. If I say make recurring, it'll say how often. Well, this is my name of this transaction, and we're going to say every single month on, let's say, the first Monday, and we'll hit save. Now we've created a schedule of these recurring transactions. And at the first Monday of next month, I'll get a little flag here up in my pending transactions saying, hey, don't forget about that. You can see all your recurring transactions underneath the settings, and you can create more there just by going to another transaction that's already in place and saying make recurring. All right, we've got about 3 minutes left before we get into questions. As I look over at the chat, I've not seen any questions right now. So I may go a little bit over because there's always more to show. But we've covered just about everything that I wanted to cover today. The last thing is going to be, actually there's two last things, and they're tied together. The last thing is going to be reports and users. How can you give people that transparency to see what they need to see without giving them too many details? Well, first off, here's our reports. We've got a variety of reports. Your general ledger report, where you can start to format the screen and you can filter down by specific dates. Maybe you want to just see August. You want to group it by payee, or maybe you want to group it by account, or maybe you want to filter down just by, youth ministry account. How we did doing transactions with that. Let's do the electric account. You can filter down by that and see just those transactions. And then if you want, you can print it or export it to Excel. Maybe you want to see the income and expenses for the month. You've got all of your different accounts. You can see what the budget was, what the actual amount was, what percentage of budget, what remaining. If you want to print it, you can filter down by or group together what you're looking at. Maybe you're just wanting to get the total income and expense. It's really flexible. It's designed to be dynamic and show you what you want to see in that way. It's not really designed to be printed out and handed to everybody, because with Church360 Ledger, you can give everybody the appropriate access. Let me show you what I mean by appropriate. If you go up here to settings, we have what's called roles. Now, roles are basically groupings of permissions. So I have an example here of the youth leader. This youth leader is different than the administrator. The administrator can do all these different things: manage the tenant, print checks, create deposits, create journal entries, all these things. The youth leader can actually only see a few selected accounts, and that's the permission. So you can go in here and say, all right, youth leader can see youth ministry under the offerings, the income, and they can see the youth ministry expenses, and they can see the youth ministry restricted fund. Those are, I think, yeah, just those three things are all they can see. Looks like we had one other in there. It says 4 selected accounts. Maybe it's just because they can see the total there. We'll go ahead and submit that and save that. So they can see a subset of accounts and nothing more. Now I can then go in under here by users and create a new one for youth minister at St. John's. We'll just say example.com and say youth leader. And that is the role that youth minister can have. We'll hit submit. And now that person has received the email to come into Church360 Ledger. And when they come in here, the only things they'll be able to see are their youth ministry account. Now, maybe you'll want to give people access to see everything, but not enter transactions. You can do that as well. That goes into that security, that transparency that's so important as you're managing church accounts. All right, I know I covered a lot. There's a lot of information in just a few short minutes. I'd love to hear your questions. I'd love to be able to explain to you in any more detail how you can get a church treasurer, a volunteer treasurer set up and running. But these are the core parts: getting your account set up, getting your budget, entering transactions, viewing reports. All of these things are the core functionality. And I hope you've seen how Church360 Ledger makes it very practical and easy to do. So Ken, I think it's time to pass it over to you and see if we've got any questions? Is there
Yeah,
anything
Peter,
you
thank
can
you for
think of
that.
I missed?
Actually, I'm going to get into my screen again and show that if you want to use this software, we do offer a 37-day free trial. And the website to go onto it is 360ledger.com. And Peter, explain why a 37-day trial.
Well, first we want to be a little different, just to catch your eye. But when you think about it, if you want to try this out, you've got to enter months of transactions and get that reconciliation in there. And sometimes the bank statement doesn't come on that 31st day. So that's why we set it up. So you can do a full month of transactions, try it out, do the reconciliation, and see if it's the right tool for you.
Okay. Couple things. I loved when you were talking about the youth leader and the roles that people can get. I mean, we just finished the summer, and I know everybody just did their VBS and different things. Wouldn't it be great to be able to show, the budget that's available for your VBS director or something like that, and give them the access there so they can see how things are being spent?
Yeah, it's absolutely a great scenario. And one thing that I always try to stress at our church is these are not your funds or my funds. These are the church's funds. And so having that transparency to see that will give you the limits as the VBS director of what you can spend, but also remind you, well, this is part of a bigger picture. This isn't just your checking account here. So yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah, there was something else that I noticed on the screen. There's a little circle eye that's down there at the bottom right corner. What's that?
I should have explained that. That is our help center. You can click that little eye at any point, get some help articles about the screen that you're on, or submit a request or question to our support team. And support is completely included in your subscription. So you can talk to a real live person who's on the other side of our 4th floor that can help you with any questions that you have about how to use the software.
Okay. And one last thing too. What are some of the ways that Ledger connects with the other Church360 suites, specifically like members?
Oh yeah, so any of the offerings that are given through Church360 members show up as a pending transaction, which says, okay, we've gotten the offerings, it's time to deposit them. And when you click on that, you get the transaction pretty much filled out with all the accounts ready to go. And so it just saves that extra step of going in and retyping it, making sure you're getting the right accounts. And it remembers how you match those funds from Church360 members with your accounts in Church360 Ledger. So that can be a little bit more intimidating at first, but once you get that going, that just makes sure that it's accurate and quick to enter those deposits.
Well, I'll tell you what, as we said earlier on, I'm not an accountant by any means. Seeing this ledger, it just seems it's so intuitive, and it just seems that you can pick it up very quickly. But that's why the free trial is so important.
Yeah.
Get into the free trial. Start using the software. If you have questions, that circle I is there. There's a phone number for our support team. And let me give you a couple other numbers here as well. Let me click through. There's actually, my number there is on the screen again. Ken.Olemeyer at cph.org with my phone number. Feel free to ask me a question if you haven't. I'll get you in touch with the right people. Or the other direct route too is some of our software consultants. So software sales at cts.cph.org. Phone number there is an 800 number. Just dial 800-325-2399, and they can help answer any of your questions. Even when you're working on the software, sometimes you don't do it in the business hours, the normal business hours, but reach out within that information button and send us an email. Let us know what your question is. We'll be able to respond very quickly to it.
Absolutely.
So with that, we're just coming up on the hour. If you're watching this live, thank you so much. If you've taken time out of your day to watch the recording of this, we really do appreciate that as well. Be on the lookout. We've got other webinars coming up on the different Church360 products, Church360 members, Church360 Unite. There'll be more Ledger webinars coming up as well. And then if you get involved in planning your church service as well, we've got the Lutheran Service Builder webinars that we do quite frequently as well. So thank you everybody for being here. We appreciate it. With that, I think I'm going to end the webinar.
Actually, I think we've got a few questions. Do we have a couple minutes to answer them?
Oh, yeah, no, go ahead.
All right. Sorry to interrupt you there, but I want to
No,
make sure these questions get answered.
most definitely.
First, Bob had the question, I should have clarified this earlier. Is this a web-based system or resident on individual computers? This is entirely web-based, so you can access it from your church office, from your home. That's what's great for volunteers, is that if they can't get into the church office on a, on a weeknight evening, they can just do this from home. And
Mm.
so it makes it really convenient for them. Now, the next one, David asked, does this allow the recording of individual offerings for our financial secretary? No, it does not. That is actually our Church360 members software. And it's members because it's all about people. And so that's where you can enter the transactions, the offerings, track it back to the individual, and print those contribution statements. Now, that's what Ken was asking me about before when I just explained those deposits. It flows from members into Church360 Ledger. And then Nicolette had the last question here. I'm transferring from Shepherd staff to Ledger. Are there ways to print a report of statement of income and expense? Does it work the same way as Shepherd staff? We have a parish planning committee parish planning group that uses these to review monthly. Now that's the income and expense report that I showed a little while ago. It's different than Shepherd staff. Shepherd staff is really meant for that print and distribute because not everybody can log in. But this has that dynamic report where you can expand or contract the different accounts and show those the difference between budget and actual. And again, give people that access to it. So they, rather than print them all out, send them that update and say, hey, go and take a look at the income and expense in Church360 Ledger. Before the meeting, you can see it, then bring your questions in. It becomes much more efficient that way. So yeah, those are the three questions. And thanks, Nicolette. She says she looks forward to checking it out. Excellent.
Yeah, no, good. And again, I put the screen back up with the free trial. So again, we thank you guys for being here today, and we thank everybody that was able to attend. And with that, we're going to close off this webinar. If you have any other questions, please feel free to contact us. And have blessings on your ministry and a blessing on your day.